Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the inaugural Distinguished Speakers Series organized by Global Alliance of Industries at NTU, GAIN. My name is Madhavi Srinivasan. I'm a professor and director of this new NTU initiative, GAIN. GAIN aims to be a one stop solution to accelerate industry NTU partnership, intercompany collaborations, and interdisciplinary collaborations across NTU and industry. This Distinguished Speaker Series is one of our key events which aims to drive this connection. If you have any questions during the webinar, please access the Slido link that is shown on the screen to post your questions there. It is now my pleasure to invite Professor Subra Suresh, NTU President, to introduce our distinguished speaker for today's session. Professor Suresh, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Madhavi, for the introduction about GAIN and the speaker series. It's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce the inaugural speaker of this distinguished speaker series, which has been created as part of Global Alliance of Industries at NTU. Mr. Chris Gopalakrishnan is no stranger to industry, philanthropy, and global engagement. So he's one of the co-founders of Infosys, a major force, a multi-billion-dollar company, and he, along with several others, founded the company in the early 1980s. And Infosys has had a major impact around the world in transforming technology, in how technology transformed lives, not just for the developing world, countries like India, but also around the world. In the last few years, he's also been engaged in philanthropy full-time. So he, not only as a co-founder of Infosys, he also served as vice chairman and CEO of Infosys before retiring from Infosys and devoting his time entirely to philanthropy. I've had the pleasure and privilege of knowing Chris for many, many years. And one of the remarkable things about his philanthropy work in India is he's among the largest private funders of innovative research, especially in areas that connect understanding the human brain with basic science and engineering and technology. And the Indian Institute of Science and many other entities in Bangalore, the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras, and also many other organizations have benefited from his wisdom and his insights and also his philanthropic support. We're also very fortunate to have him participate and engage with NTU in many different ways over the last 3 years. 3 years ago, Chris established 2 presidential postdoctoral positions, the endowment for 2 positions, and we've been fortunate to attract bright young scholars to come to NTU through that support. Chris is also an Anyang Professor of the Practice at NTU, and through that, he's been engaged both through visits when it has been possible and also today remotely. I particularly want to take this opportunity to thank Chris for joining us from Bangalore at a time when COVID is having a very devastating effect on India generally. And I just want to say that there are 700 people joining us today online, several hundred from India. I want to express our heartfelt thoughts and prayers to all our colleagues and friends who are joining us. And I know Singapore has been closely engaged in exploring ways in which we could support India at this time of critical need. I wish all our colleagues joining us today and their friends and relatives and family members all the best during this crisis. So with this, we look forward to hearing Chris present his lecture. And after the presentation, we'll have Q&A. And please feel free to submit your questions during the talk through Slido, and I'll be moderating the session after his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Subra Suresh. Can you hear me properly? So thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity to share my thoughts with you on this pandemic. More importantly, the lessons learned from our responses to the pandemic. In a crisis, our lives change, and these changes are pointers to weaknesses prevailing before the crisis or changes to take advantage of opportunities arising out of the crisis. I've made this presentation with the faculty and the student community in mind. The focus is on opportunities in research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. This engine of innovation is what drives economy, creates jobs and wealth, and transforms societies. As Subra already mentioned, India is battling the second wave of the virus. Some other countries have also faced multiple waves. I believe that till a majority of the people in the world are vaccinated, we cannot let our guards down since the virus is spreading, it's mutating, and can reinfect people. I want to also acknowledge and thank the people of Singapore, the organizations and industries there. I've been involved in getting oxygen concentrators into India, and many of these are now funded by organizations like Temasek. So thank you very much. I want to start by setting the context. I want to share the components and the players in the innovation ecosystem. This will help us focus on those lessons that positively impact the innovation ecosystem. The activities that I focus on are research that creates new knowledge, new intellectual properties, ideas, processes, models, etc. Innovations take the research and translate them into products or businesses that then are taken to the market, customers, and society. Research becomes useful to society when these are commercially introduced into the market by businesses. Only some businesses, especially large businesses, support research at academic institutions. A strategy around working with the innovation ecosystem is important for businesses and is a must since the knowledge outside a business is significantly larger than within, and the business gets to benefit from this larger ecosystem. Existing businesses, industry may not be best placed to take the risk with these innovations. They are unable to take the financial risk associated with these. This is where entrepreneurs come in, funded by venture capitalists. All these activities must coexist within the academic institution and in some cases within a research park set up to bring all these players together. Governments put in place the right rules and regulations to create a dynamic and vibrant innovation ecosystem. I've divided my presentation into two parts. I will share some observations first. These are my observations related to the pandemic. And in the second part, I will cover lessons learned and how the faculty and students can benefit from these lessons. Black swan events are those that are not predictable, occur when least expected. Hence, we are unprepared for these. Even when some people had predicted that these events could occur, since we are not clear about the timing, we do not think that this will happen. So we get surprised. Typically, the impact of these events is significant and affect large sections of society. Some of the events that occurred in recent times are the financial crisis in 2008. A smaller SolarWinds hacking event happened in 2020 that affected businesses primarily in the US, and of course, the current COVID-19 pandemic. Of these, the pandemic is the worst since it affects all people of the entire world. The last time something like this affecting the world was in 1918. Of course, you can also think about the World War. At the time, that is in 1918, it infected about 500 million people worldwide and killed approximately 20 to 30 million people. COVID-19 to date has infected about 150 million people globally and killed 3.2 million people since January 2020. The global economy has contracted by 3.3% in 2020. It is as if all of us lost a year from our lives. We are actually going through another event, which we may not actually realize because it's happening slowly. This is the climate change and the sustainable development issue. Now, can we be better prepared to face such black swan events in the future? Can we address the issue of climate crisis before the issue spirals out of control and creates havoc in our weather systems? COVID-19 affects people differently, so I'm getting into these observations. Very few people get serious infections. Less than 3 to 5% require hospitalization, and about 1 to 2% die. It seems to infect older people and people with comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, coronary diseases, etc., more than others. In fact, a report said that 80% of the people admitted to hospitals in the US were considered obese. The other interesting observation is that the worst affected countries like US and India have healthcare systems that are polar opposites. US spends most amount of money in healthcare and has technologically one of the most advanced healthcare infrastructures. India, on the other hand, spends one of the least amount of money on healthcare per capita, and its healthcare infrastructure is not as good, especially outside larger metros. We are now more conscious of our own health and health of our own immune systems. We now know that we need to invest more money into the healthcare system. We need to improve the access and affordability of the healthcare systems. We need new models for healthcare. COVID has exposed the weaknesses in personal health and in our healthcare systems. There is nothing like a crisis to force us to respond, to act. The world's best scientists are working to study the virus and how it infects people, what cures are possible, or how to manage the illness, and can we produce a vaccine to prevent getting infected. We are also studying how the virus spreads and its mutations as it spreads. In a short period, there have been more than 200,000 coronavirus-related journal articles and reprints, as this chart shows here. This is an explosion of scientific publications in a very short period of time. Scientists are collaborating internationally to fight this virus. Many scientists stopped working on their current projects and started working on problems related to understanding or fighting COVID-19, a multidisciplinary, multinational effort to solving the problem. How can we replicate this speed when there is no crisis, or when the crisis is slow burning crisis, such as the climate crisis? Let's look at the story of the mRNA vaccine. This is one of the many vaccines. Two of the vaccines that were introduced were what are called mRNA vaccines. This story is about being at the right place at the right time. And we are grateful that Kathleen Carrico had worked on her intuition and insight for over 40 years. In spite of tremendous odds of not getting funding and not getting a tenure position at the university, she persisted with her research, fine-tuning the technique of injecting mRNA solution into living things so that it can manufacture proteins inside the cells of living things. While most others were working on DNA, she decided to focus on mRNA and RNA, the instructions from DNA to protein synthesis. RNA has specific purpose and task. You can think of this as a piece of code out of the many in the DNA which does one and only task. We can create these messenger RNA in labs and inject them into living beings. The cells can be made to manufacture proteins. This is exactly what the mRNA vaccine by Pfizer and Moderna do. We instruct our cells to manufacture the spike protein from COVID-19 virus and induce our immune system to create antibodies to kill the foreign viruses. Moderna is one of the companies that was founded in 2010. It was a fledgling business before COVID-19, and today its market cap is more than $70 billion US. Its valuation jumped 10 times in the past 12 months, again being at the right place at the right time. In the past, vaccines took a minimum of 4 years and more generally 10 years to bring to human use. From the time the genetic code of the COVID-19 vaccine was published, there are more than 10 vaccines that are in human use or trial within a short span of about 12-13 months. Can we use these techniques in future to fight against such pandemics and other diseases? Can we accelerate the development cycle to bring medicines to market faster? This is an example of a collaboration between academia, industry, and government in India. Before the pandemic, India was importing ventilators which are used for helping patients with weak or failing lungs to breathe. One of the symptoms of COVID-19 infection is lung infection, and some of the patients with serious conditions require ventilator support. The demand for ventilators across the world spiked exponentially. This exposed a critical weakness in the healthcare system in India, dependence on imports. So Government of India created a task force across academia, industry, and defense labs to manufacture ventilators. This was successful, and India now manufactures ventilators for its own use and also exports to other countries. Again, how can we institutionalize such collaborations? How can we deliver results faster? The crisis accelerated the adoption of digital technology. All interactions with outside world now happen over digital communication links. My own talk today is using a digital means. This was a transition that was happening slowly, but the crisis accelerated the transition. Some believe that what would have taken 5 years has happened in 5 months. Telemedicine is one such application. Since people could not visit clinics and hospitals for doctor consultations, they started using telemedicine tools. Of course, always there are other benefits also. The patient commutes less, the wait time at the clinic is less, the interaction can be recorded, and hence, this is actually a better way of consulting doctors. Digital tools have become sophisticated and can now accept documents and images to be shared, can accept inputs from wearable devices that also can be then made available to the doctor during the consultation. The prescriptions are sent back via messages. And in fact, in India, the regulations had to be changed to accept e-prescriptions by the pharmacy. So the crisis creates new business opportunities, actually creates new ways of interacting, creating conveniences for citizens and improved efficiency. The Indian IT services industry, which I belong to, provides consulting and IT services to the global 2,000 companies around the world. They're an extension of IT departments of these clients. The industry is about $190 billion, employing about 4.5 million people. So when COVID-19 struck and cities were put under lockdown, offices and workspaces were shut down. Employees of the IT companies had to transition to work from home overnight. Imagine the complexity of moving equipment, setting up security environments, training people on new protocols, informing clients, making sure that the productivity is still acceptable, and lastly, address the issue of employee morale when they work out of home, away from their team. The transition happened smoothly and no client suffered any IT system downtime during this period. Clients were also doing similar transitions in their own organizations and understood that this is required. These transitions made by the clients were also supported by Indian IT companies. Indian companies earned high marks on how they managed these transitions. Clients' confidence and trust on their partners increased, and in fact, the demand for services increased during the pandemic and revenues also increased. Globally, we have transitioned to work from home wherever possible. Again, the crisis has accelerated the move to digital life for all of us. You're probably part of this experience that I'm going to talk about, the transition to online education. Before the crisis, this was being piloted or employed minimally. Online mode was used in continuing education and to extend the reach of the university. COVID pandemic forced this mode to become the default mode, forced teachers and students to learn to use online education and its tools and technology. The challenges of pedagogy, teacher training on delivery, privacy at home for students were all addressed sufficiently. One adapts when there is no choice. Now I want to talk about a flipped model that is being tried at IIT Madras. Some of you may know that IITs are some of the premier educational institutions in the world. Out of 100 students applying to IITs, 1 or 2 get admission. Entry is really, really tough. Now IIT Madras flipped it for their online degree program. This is being piloted. Anybody who gets admission to any engineering undergraduate program can get admission to the course. The entry criteria is completely liberalized and everybody gets an opportunity to study at IIT. But the exit criteria is stricter and to the standards of IIT Madras. Students who don't make it can exit at various stages and get certificates based on the courses completed. Only if one completes all the requirements, one would get the final degree, which says degree from IIT Madras. Such models are now feasible with online education. So we have to, rethink the model itself, the pedagogy, when you adopt new models and new technology. I believe that education will use hybrid model in the future and universities will try giving access to many and final degree will be given to few who complete all the requirements. COVID pandemic also exposed fissures in society. In online education, if one can't afford a user device or afford to get internet connectivity, one cannot participate in this. These students will lose a year at least because of the pandemic. Similarly, if you don't have private space at home, again, one is at a disadvantage. Many of the online applications run only on smartphones. In India and developing countries, lots of people still use feature phones. They may not be able to use many of the online applications. Another issue is secure Wi-Fi networks at home. Privacy at home to work uninterruptedly. Workers doing physical work also lose out because how can you deliver goods or work in factories or work in hospitality industry sitting at home? Many of them lost their jobs during the pandemic. We have an opportunity to create a better world. How can we create a world that is more inclusive, affordable, and equitable? The story of a company, Zoom, which was at the right place at the right time, is also interesting. Zoom introduced video conferencing product in 2013. Their goal was to deliver happiness to users. They addressed this by focusing on ease of use, smooth and faster video, cost-effective solutions, and ease of buying the subscription service. This is what Clayton Christensen called low-end innovation beating sustained or incremental innovation. When the pandemic struck, the need for video conferencing in personal and professional lives increased. Even though Microsoft, Google, Cisco had products in this space, these products were more expensive or were not easy to use or actually to purchase. And Zoom really zoomed. Currently, the market cap of Zoom is around $95 billion. This is again an example of taking advantage of an opportunity and being better prepared than anyone else to take advantage of the opportunity that's present there. At the beginning of the pandemic, many countries increased the money supply to stimulate the economy and lessen the economic impact on people. People who lost jobs were given some money to take care of themselves and their families. The stimulus totaled about 124% of the global GDP. That's about $22 trillion. This huge infusion of money means that the financial markets saw significant uptick, venture funding increased, and funding for startups also increased. People who owned financial assets saw their wealth grow disproportionately, and the income gap actually increased during the pandemic. The rich became richer and the poor became poorer. This income gap needs to be addressed, and we need better models for capitalism and social security in the future. More capital was available to fund businesses, so we are seeing more IPOs, especially in the tech space and businesses that are technology intensive. We are seeing more funding for startups and entrepreneurs. We are seeing more funding for applied research, especially if you can create COVID-specific solutions, including addressing the need for creating local capacities and capabilities, reducing the dependence on global supply chain. I expect several changes in the global supply chains as countries look to reduce their dependencies on other countries. We saw faster approvals for vaccines. All stages were fast-tracked, and this is around the world. This is the first time in the history of the world that vaccines were approved within 1 year from the lab to vaccinating people. Export and import regulations were loosened to make medical equipment and medicines available to fight COVID. And in India, from the business perspective, virtual board meetings and annual general meetings were approved, again driven by necessity. Now, why can't these approvals be faster in normal times? Can governments work faster and reduce the cost of bureaucracy? So now I will transition to talk about opportunities. And again, I will restrict my observations in this space of innovation economy. And, you must have heard the saying, never let a crisis go to waste. The pandemic has thrown up lots of data, especially about the virus, infections, how it infects people, population level data, etc. One of the best ways to analyze this data, and this is leveraging machines, is to produce inferences using AI and ML tools. The demand for AI and ML skills increased during the pandemic. The traditional model of computing is the procedural computing model. You tell the computer what the algorithm is through the program code, and the computer executes this code. This model is okay if you know how to solve the problem first. In the AI ML model, you train the computer using labeled test data to arrive at the expected results. You train to arrive at the expected results. The computer figures out the transformations that are required. And in fact, the output of the AI ML engine is the algorithm. So you don't need to know actually how to solve the problem. The computer's power is used to figure out the algorithm. So this allows a new set of problems, class of problems that were hitherto not solved using computers to be solved using computers. Pattern recognition, facial recognition, speech recognition, real-time translation of speech, natural language processing, security applications, etc., etc. Wherever large amount of data is produced, we can use AI ML to extract inferences. This extends the power of digital computing further in many new problem-solving scenarios. I recommend AI ML concepts and introduction to be part of curriculum for students, even from the school itself. So I introduced this in schools just like we did introduce programming in the school curriculum. during the digital computer revolution. Protein folding is very complex. Proteins are complex molecules that are manufactured by the body for sustaining life. When proteins are created, they have a curly structure and then they fold to a unique structure, and this gives its unique functionality. In the past, we have not been able to predict the shapes they fold into and hence the functionality. DeepMind's AlphaFold has been able to predict to high accuracy the structure of protein. This provides an opportunity for us to create various proteins in lab or create a factory. Knowing this code could completely change the way we deal with treatments for many diseases and could potentially lead to completely artificially made materials and prosthetics. Knowing how proteins fold also opens up new potential within targeted drug discovery. It will also result in us being able to create biomaterials that could be used to create incredibly accurate prosthetics or really anything that requires compatibility with a living organism. So this actually, again, is a huge, huge opportunity, the bioengineering, biomanufacturing, biotech space. Continuing on the same lines, actually, the mRNA technology itself is very, very interesting. Just like we program a digital computer to solve a problem, now we can program mRNA vaccine or mRNA material, and this carries instructions to the cell to manufacture. So in the case of the mRNA vaccine, it carried the instructions for manufacturing the spike proteins in the human body. The body recognizes these foreign materials and creates the antibody to destroy the spike proteins, and we develop immunity. The use can be extended to fight other diseases like cancer, malaria, HIV, tuberculosis, multiple sclerosis, etc. Through genetic analysis of individual tumors, cancer patients could one day receive personalized vaccines designed to target the specific mutations afflicting them. This is a platform technology. Once we know how to code the mRNA and deliver this safely into the body body takes over the production. The same technique could be used, as I said, to fight many diseases. This will transform healthcare. And that's what I want to talk about next. This is one of the major opportunities that I see in front of us. COVID has shown deficiencies in the current healthcare system in developing and developed world. How this virus is disproportionately targeted people with comorbidities has opened new opportunities in healthcare. I see these opportunities in 5 categories. First, in traditional healthcare, the use of personal health records improves portability and interoperability of healthcare systems. We can introduce concepts like telemedicine to improve access and provide quality healthcare to remote areas. Second, using healthcare data and AI and ML, we can augment the capabilities of physicians significantly. We can use data from wearable devices to track health conditions remotely and continuously. We can use techniques like remote ICU support to create centralized support where specialists are in short supply. DNA sequencing will allow us to understand the specific strains of virus or bacteria causing diseases. Another technology that will transform healthcare is stem cell technology. Third, with advanced diagnostic and treatment options, we will move to personalized and precision medicine. An individual's health can be tracked from birth to death and can be managed to provide better health outcomes with lower cost. Fourth, we will shift our focus from curative and palliative care to preventive care. We will live longer. Can we live healthy longer? Can we look at a healthy lifestyle that integrates exercise and food into health tracking? Fifth and last category is the whole space of senior citizen care and services. The world's population is aging and living longer. Services targeted towards older population will be a huge business. This segment of population will be more than 1 billion pretty soon. I see opportunities in healthcare exploding after this crisis. On the technology side, we are at the beginning of a new wave of technological advancement. This wave is called the fourth industrial revolution. Just like the previous industrial revolutions, we will see significant opportunities for research, economic growth, job creation, and wealth creation. If the pandemic had struck even 10 years back, we would not have fared as well as we are faring now. We did not have sufficient digital connectivity or collaboration tools like Zoom. I am the product of the third industrial revolution, or the digital computer revolution. The GDP of the world was $11 trillion in 1980, and today it's $88 trillion, 8 times growth. Technology is driving the fourth industrial revolution, given here, will impact businesses, industries, and personal life. We see new leaderships emerging in business as we saw in the previous industrial revolution. For today's youth, this means learning new skills to prepare and for becoming future ready. If you're becoming entrepreneurs, this is the best time to become an entrepreneur. And each one of you must decide the role you're going to play in creating this new world. Climate change is another area where significant opportunities exist for research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. What are the lessons from fighting the pandemic that we will take to fight climate change? Because this is also a global problem. Can we replicate the speed of response? Can we replicate the global collaboration on research? Can industry and academia provide new solutions? And can regulators make appropriate rules and regulations to incentivize behaviors that are needed from individuals and organizations? Just like the entire world is fighting the pandemic, we need to fight climate change and create a safer, better world for future generations. I talked about speed. So can we institutionalize the speed of response that we saw in fighting pandemic in other challenges? I believe that speed can only happen if there are dedicated teams working to solve these problems. These teams stay together till the problems are solved. They are given longer-term guaranteed budgets. Of course, there will be periodic reviews to measure progress. We also need to look at global regulatory environment. We need to synchronize regulations across geographies. Does it make sense to have national trials on medicines? It increases costs of bringing these medicines to market. And we need to look at how we can learn from our fight of the COVID pandemic to see what we can do here better. During the pandemic, we saw resilience of the global population, businesses, and institutions. Of course, by necessity. As Charles Darwin says, only the resilient survive. Only those that are able to adapt and adopt survive. Some countries respond better than others. Singapore is one of those countries that responded better. Corollary to resilience is robustness. It is about identifying potential risks and creating risk mitigation strategies, plans, and resources upfront. It is being prepared for the worst scenario. We need to learn from others' mistakes and ensure that we don't repeat this. We need to make sure that we don't make the same mistake again in the future. And we must have reserves for a rainy day. These are many interesting lessons from the pandemic. So the global economy has grown significantly over the last 40 years. I've taken 1980 as the year to start from because that's the year I started working professionally. I was part of the digital computer revolution, and I was part of building that industry and played a small role. I believe that global economy will grow significantly over the next 30 years, and that's the work life of many of the people attending today's talk, especially the students. You need to think about your role in building the global economy over the next 30 years. Also, which countries and which regions will grow faster. Current thinking is that this is Asia's century and Asian countries will grow faster. Now, there's an interesting way to put it. Now, do you want to be the driver? Do you want to be the builder that creates the autonomous car, self-driving car, or do you want to just be a passenger? So do you want to be a driver creating the self-driving car, or do you want to just be the passenger? In summary, I believe that the next 30 years are going to be even better than the last 30 years. There's so much research that's possible with emerging technologies that impact so many sectors. So many science questions still need solution. Can we cure cancer? How does the brain work? Can we eradicate pandemics like the COVID-19? How do we solve climate change? Is there life in another part of the galaxy? Is there a standard theory of physics that explains everything? Can we live longer, healthier? As the global economy grows, investment in research will grow. Investments in innovation and entrepreneurship will grow. New companies and new leadership will emerge. Huge amounts of capital will be invested, and the venture community will support new businesses, and businesses will become stronger and more global. Hence, I believe the best of times are ahead of us. Let me wish you all the very best in the future. Thanks for listening to me patiently. Thank you very much. I will now stop sharing my screen.
I'll just thank you, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, for your insightful sharing. We have received several questions on Slido, post-event and during the event too. The platform is still open for anyone who wishes to pose the questions. And Professor Suresh, thanks for coming over to the podium. I'll hand over to you to take care of the facilitating the Q&A session. Yeah.
Thank you, Madhavi. Chris, thank you for your insightful presentation, but also for the optimism with which you ended the talk at a time of significant global distress. There are a number of questions that we have here, but I wanted to start with one question related to education because we are at NTU here. You mentioned about the flipped classroom model that IIT Madras has introduced, which is a very bold attempt because, as you said, 1 to 2 people out of 100 in one of the largest, most populous countries in the world can get into the IITs to give opportunities to as many as possible. This is a new model, and even though the entrance criteria are very different, the exit criteria preserve the quality assurance for which the IITs are known. So one of the critical questions, like in an example like this, many universities would like to do this. IITs are public institutions. Can you comment a little bit about a financial model to sustain it for the long haul? Let's say in a country like India, if 1 million people enroll or 100,000 people enroll in this course, and large number of them continue for a couple of years, what kind of a financial model is required to sustain this for the long haul? And what is the role of IITs, and what is the role of the government, and what is the role of industry and the local government in sustaining this? I'm sure a lot of thought has gone into this, but it'll be good for us to hear that because most universities are thinking about this model.
First of all, the reason for thinking about this is, we all talk about an inclusive society, which means equal access to opportunity. So this provides the opportunity for students to join an IIT program. Many people in the audience may not know students actually leave school around the 10th class, 10th grade, to actually join preparatory programs to take this IIT entrance examination, and the examinations were very difficult. So they wanted to create a new model where if you get admission to any engineering program anywhere, you can also join this school. Now, to answer your question, they do have to pay the fees, and in fact, this brings a lot of actually new revenue streams for the IITs concerned, and that's how they will manage this program. And then they've tightened the exit criteria, so there are tests at every stage, at the end of every credit and things like that, and they have to get the same number of credits that you would get at the end of a degree program to get the final certification. So I don't think the number of graduates will change. It's just that everybody gets an equal opportunity to participate in an IIT like quality program.
Great. Thank you. One of the questions that has come here, and I'll slightly narrow the scope of this just to ask, at a time, as you pointed out in your talk, technology has made it easier for the global community to come together during the pandemic. At the same time, the pandemic itself has made it very difficult for people to come together. And geopolitical factors have made it even more difficult for people to come together in different parts of the world. So coming out of this, based on your experience with Infosys and still having connections to a number of industries in India, and especially to the startup world, which you are leading in supporting through Axelor in Bangalore, are there things on your mind, some predictions you are willing to venture related to this tension between globalization on the one hand and going in the reverse direction of globalization due to a variety of other factors that have nothing to do with technology? How do you think that will play out in the next 5 years or so?
See, even when we speak, actually we are becoming more globalized because of technology, right? It's just that physically we are not coming together. Sometimes trade is getting curtailed because of geopolitics. Supply chains got curtailed because of the pandemic and not being able to transport goods and things like that. Or supply chains got constrained because they were required locally in the country. So, for example, rightly so, vaccines are going to be used to vaccinate the citizens before it's being exported, right? I think this tension will always be there, but I believe that we are more global and globalized today than ever before, and digitally and physically. The number of people traveling before the pandemic was, the highest ever in the history of the world. In a bad way, even the number of refugees were the largest ever in the history of the world. So we are globalized more than ever, I believe, physically and technologically, in spite of the geopolitics, etc.
With respect to the startups, and you are engaged with many of them, and NTU has a very vibrant startup ecosystem, and part of the goal of GAIN is to connect large companies and multinationals who have a presence on our campus, also with potential startups, including NTU spinouts and so forth. Can you specifically talk about opportunities and challenges for technology startups, deep tech startups, coming out of the pandemic, hopefully before too long? What has the COVID-19 made it easier for the startups, and what has it made what are the factors that have made it difficult for the startups to survive during the pandemic, other than not being able to come together physically?
See, the pandemic has, shown the benefit or the dependence on science and technology. In that sense, there is much better appreciation of the use of technology to solve science and technology to solve societal problems. Startups require, deep tech startups require patient capital because, it takes longer for their products to come to market. If it's a vaccine or a medicine, you'll have to go through trials and things like that before it can be brought to market. So again, it requires patient capital. The amount of capital required may also be much higher when it comes to deep tech startups. Having said that, as I mentioned in my talk, the amount of money that has been pumped into the global economy is so huge, and that money is looking for better returns. And one of the asset classes that it's going after is the startup community, the startup world. So the number of unicorns have increased, the number of tech IPOs have increased, the number of startups that got funded have increased, all during the pandemic. And so very optimistic about the opportunities. And then the other side of that is there's so much technology, emerging technology that's coming, which can disrupt existing businesses. New business models are coming. So, it's actually, I truly believe that it's best of times for startups in terms of opportunities to create new businesses, emerging technologies, funding perspective, and mentoring and people with knowledge who can support these startups.
You mentioned, Chris, in your presentation that COVID has exposed a lot of inequalities in various societies. So if you look at across countries, for example, the access to vaccination among developed countries has been significantly more than in developing countries, and even within developed countries or in developing countries. So US is one example, and India is another example. There is a huge disparity in vaccination rate depending on the opportunities available to different segments of society. Another thing that COVID has also exposed is the rate of job loss, for example, in the US has been disproportionately high for women and underrepresented minorities. And this is not just the US, it's around the world. So there is a lot of these geopolitical factors which have been exposed around the world by COVID. Individual countries, of course, have a responsibility to address them. But collectively, are there lessons learned, and in terms of coordination that is required, that's different in the post-COVID world than, for example, in the post-World War II world, to come together? For example, after the World War II, a lot of institutions were created to address this around the world, United Nations and many other organizations. So does COVID lead to the same kind of approach in a new way, or does it lead to a completely different approach because of the suddenness and the unexpected nature of this global crisis?
The need for new models is very, very clear. The need for different responses is very clear. In fact, if you look at President Biden's approach to how to stimulate the economy, you in some sense feel that he's taking lessons after World War II, how US helped Europe to rebuild, how US helped Japan to rebuild and stimulate the global economy. And it also was one of the golden periods in the US economy itself, right? Because you created new consumers and new markets for the products that US could produce. I think we need to, we need to have such new models emerge. For example, when you raise the level of poverty, raise the level of income and reduce poverty, you are creating new class of consumers and new class of educated workforce and things like that, and that will stimulate the economy. I've personally seen this. The per capita income in India was $600 25 years back, and today it's about $2,700. And the economy has gone from around 600 billion to about 2.7 trillion now. So, huge amount. That is, 4 times in 25 years, more than 4 times in 25 years. So that's what happens when you raise, the income levels and provide more opportunities, equal opportunities. So we do need to address these things. This will also bring in social harmony. In some sense, these are some of the what I believe Asian values are. Society comes first, harmony is important, individual and individualism is what creates some of the problems. I think we need to discuss and debate and think about these things. And when it comes to vaccines, for example, till everybody is vaccinated and till the entire world is safe, you are not safe wherever you are. You can actually hunker down and be in a gated community with no interactions with the outside world. But, is that a good life to have, right? So everybody needs to be vaccinated before we are all safe. So we need to think like that if you want to create a better society.
Thank you, Chris. Of course, that question that I asked you before, which is a collection of few other questions that came, there's not an easy answer to that. So thank you for that. Let me just close with one question that came up with somebody. It's more local and personal question for this individual. He says, "Should I buy stocks of Infosys right now?"
See, I can't talk about one company, but I can say that the technology industry, the IT services industry have done well during the pandemic. Just look at the results the US technology companies announced, just this last week. If I'm not wrong, 4 or 5 companies got a revenue of $1.2 trillion in this quarter or something like that. That's, if that was an economy, it will be the 4th largest economy in the world, right? So tech industry is doing well, and IT services industry has done well during the pandemic. I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Chris. We have a lot more questions than we have time. So let me thank you for joining us remotely through technology. And also, we very much look forward to seeing you in person at NTU before too long. So thank you once again for your engagement with NTU. And on behalf of all the people who are joining us in person and online, we express our gratitude to you and wish you all the safety in the coming weeks and months. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Professor Suresh, and all of you stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gopalakrishnan and Professor Suresh, for the engaging, lively discussion. I would like to invite Professor Suresh to return to his seat, please. Thank you. Yep. Thank you, Professor Suresh. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of this session. Thank you, everyone who have joined us in person here and also online. We have over 600 participants online. We look forward to seeing you in other GAIN events. So do check out our websites for upcoming events. Hope to see you there soon. Until we meet again, take care and stay safe. Thank you.